make a simple tote bag. It's just a bag like this. It has a pocket in the lining. The bottom is squared. All you need is a half of a yard of a sturdy weight fabric. It's nice to have a little body to your tote bag. A lightweight upholstery fabric or a medium weight denim is nice. A half a yard for lining. It can be a lighter weight material. Your other basic sewing supplies, a cutting mat, ruler, cutter, of course thread to match, and your sewing machine and ironing board. I'll get started by cutting out. First, I'm going to cut out the main part of the tote bag. I'll line the selvages up. I need 2 pieces, 15 by 14 inches. If you have a directional fabric, you'll want your direction going up and down will be going the 15-inch direction. Making the first cut to square this edge and trim off the selvages. And measure 14 inches over. Make my second cut. I'm going to go back and make it 15. Slide it down. So my first cut will be on the 0 line. And the second at 15. The bag outsides, now I'm going to cut the handles, which are 4 by 19. Cut them going the lengthwise direction. Using my ruler, I'm measuring 4 inches over. Cutting. I'll square this end. Then flip it around. Measure 19 inches from here. Cut and square the other end. There's the handles. Now for the lining. I need 2 pieces that are 13 3/4 by 15. First, I'll square this end and trim off the selvages. Move it over to 15 inches. I'll square this end. And then line it up with the mat on 13 3/4. Now I'm going to cut 2 pockets out of the lining. They'll be 7.5 by 9.5 inches. Of course, you could change this size to be whatever size you'd like your pocket to be. This is just a standard size. I'm going to fold my fabric in half, and using my cutting mat as a guide. If you have a larger ruler, a large square, you can use that and then use your ruler as a guide. But with the 6 by 24, I'll still use the mat for this. 7.5 inches. I'll go ahead and line up my 2 0 edges. this at 9.5. Then 7.5. So this is the main outside of the bag with the handles, the lining, and the pocket. The next step is to iron the handles. Iron this in half lengthwise, wrong sides together. With upholstery fabric, I recommend taking a little scrap material and testing your iron to make sure the temperature is not too hot. Now open it up and fold this edge just slightly shy of the crease and press in place. Do the same with the other side. You'll want to have just a small gap between the two edges. Then fold it in half again. You'll want to do this with both handles. Now I'm going to pin these edges so that they'll stay together as I top stitch them down. Now I'll top stitch them down. I'm pulling slightly to give tension to keep the top fabric from slowly inching forward. I want to keep it even between each pin, taking out each pin as I come to it. There's one handle. Now I'm going to show you how to use a top stitching foot on the second one. You can use a regular foot, but some people find it helpful to use a top stitching foot. It's also called a blind hem foot on some machines. I moved my needle over to the left position. The guide on this foot will help you keep a straight stitching line even though you have a lot of thickness. Now I'm going to top stitch down the other side of the other handle. And do the same again. Now here's both handles top stitched on both sides. Now I'm going to sew the bottom of the bag together. Here's the main two pieces, right sides together. First, I'm going to cut a corner out of the bottom pieces of the fabric. Again, if your fabric's directional, you're going to want your direction going this way. This is 14 inches. And of the two bottom corners, I'm lining up the ruler at the 1 5/8 inch mark. Careful not to overcut into the fabric. I'll cut a corner there and then again out of this corner. Now I'm going to sew this bottom edge here. I'm going to sew this with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to repeat these same steps with the lining. This is 15 inches. I'm going to cut a square out of each corner along the 15-inch side. Okay, 1 5/8 inches this way, and 1 5/8 inches there. It's 1 5/8 inches square. And then sew the lining together. I'm sewing this right sides together with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to pin the pocket together. I'm just going to use a few pins to keep it together while I sew it. Now we're going to sew this right sides together and turn it out. So I want to leave an opening. I'm going to leave about a 3-inch opening on the side. I'm just going to use this to mark a line so I can remember not to sew there. This I'm going to sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Remember to always backstitch well at the edge of an opening. I'll sew to the corner and pivot. I'm sewing all the way around to the other side of the opening. Backstitch again well. Pull it out and trim the threads. Now I'll go to the ironing board. Before turning it right side out, I want to trim the corners. And turn. Poke the corners out. Of course, you want your corners to be turned out nice and neat, but remember not to over poke. Now, roll the seam right to the edge and press. There's lots of different ways that you can make a pocket. You can just iron under the edges and hem the top edge. This way, it's just easy for beginning. It gives you nice finished edges all the way around just to top stitch in place. Now I'll pin it to the lining. I'm going to top stitch along one of the long edges of the pocket. That will be the top of the pocket. If you like, you can use the top stitching foot to help you guide in your top stitching. The next step is to pin the pocket in place. Now you want to center your pocket onto the lining. A real easy way to find the center is to just press each piece in half. I'm just going to lightly press the lining in half and also the pocket in half. Now back to pinning it on. Here's the lining right side up. I'm going to measure 3 inches down from the top edge with my ruler. That line is at the 3-inch mark. Here's the pocket, right side up with the top stitch edge up. I'll line it up right along the edge of the ruler. The fold is matching. Now I'll pin the pocket in place. Now I'm going to top stitch the pocket down. On the top edge of a pocket, always make sure you back stitch very well. That edge gets a lot of stress. Now as I'm sewing along here, I just sewed the opening of the pocket closed. Pivot at the corner. Turn again. Now only sew around 3 sides. The top side is left open. And there's the pocket. So here's the pocket. You can do a pocket on both sides if you like. I'm going to show you how to divide this pocket so that you have a cell phone pocket and a pin pocket within this pocket. To make the cell phone pocket, I'm going to measure 3.5 inches over from the edge of the pocket and mark a line. And then 4 inches down. Of course, you could change this size to accommodate your phone if you have a different size. Now for the pin pocket, I'm going to measure 1 inch over from this edge. And then 5 inches down. If you don't sew across the bottom, your pin could get lost all the way down in that pocket. Now I'm going to sew on these lines, and that will create these pockets. First, I'm sewing the pin pocket, back stitching well at the top. Sew all the way down. Now I'm just going to lift up the foot and scoot over to this little line and sew it, back stitching at both ends. Trim all the threads. I'll flip it around and start at the bottom for the cell phone pocket. Then slide across and stitch across the bottom. So there's the pocket with some more threads to trim. sew the sides of the tote bag together. Here it is, right sides together, edges even. I'll pin the two sides. There's one side, now the other. And do the same for the lining. Again, right sides together, edges even. In one side of the lining, I'm going to want to leave an opening so that we can turn the bag right side out when we're done. You can either use double pins so that you can remember not to sew the opening closed, or just simply put a mark there. Now I'm going to sew all 4 of these seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to sew these one right after the other. Now the other side. And the last side has the opening in it. So right to the edge of the opening, back stitch well, skip across to the other side, and finish the seam. Now press all the seams open. Now I'm going to press the seam open. This seam has the opening in it. I'm going to go ahead and just press it as if it were sewn. Press it open. Then the other side. And then back to the sewing machine to sew the corners in the bag. Now I'm going to pin the corner of the bags. Like this, the seams matching. Two corners on the outside, and then the 2 on the lining. Make sure the seams are matching. Now sew across all of these with a 5/8 inch seam allowance on each one of these. Now sew this with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, starting on the fold. And going all the way across. Again, I'm going to do one right after the other. Make sure when you're sewing this that you keep your seams open. You don't want to sew it with a seam flipped back. Here's the last corner. Next, I'll pin the bag together. I'll turn the bag right side out. And first I need to pin the handles on. I'm going to place them 3 inches from the seam. So just measure 3 inches over and put a pin to mark it. I'll mark 3 inches from the seam on both sides. Now I'll pin the handle in place. It's very important that you don't get your handle twisted. It's easy to sew it in like that, but if you just take it out flat and then carefully bring the ends side by side, your handle will not be twisted. I'll line this up beside that pin and then pin it in place. Line this one up beside the pin. Pin it on. Check to make sure the handle's not twisted. It lays flat. I'm going to go ahead and sew across these handles to reinforce them, make it stronger, and also to keep it in place for when I sew the lining to the bag. I'm going to sew this down with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Back and forth a couple times to make it good and strong. And then just slide to the next one. Now I'll pin the lining to the bag. Okay, now slide the bag into the lining, right sides together, and matching the side seams. I'm going to pin it starting at the side seam and pin the seam with the seam allowances open. Now making sure the edges are even and it's all flat. Pin all the way around the top edge. Now the lining and bag are all pinned together, and I'm going to sew all the way around this top edge. Starting at the side seam and using a 5/8 inch seam allowance, I'll sew around this top edge. Especially being that you have a thick outer fabric and the thinner lining, the lining might want to shift or stretch, so just take it slow and make sure you ease in any extra fullness between the pins. I'll just overlap my stitches an inch or so and pull it off and go to the ironing board. Now here's the opening in the lining, and pull the bag out through that. There it is. Now I'll tuck the lining inside. And press this seam around the edge. Again, it's important to make sure this edge is opened up, and you want your lining to be rolled just slightly to the inside. You don't want it to show at all on the outside. Now that it's pressed all the way around, I'm going to top stitch this edge. Again, I'm going to use the edge stitch foot. A lot of people find that it's really helpful for making a nice even top stitch when you have all these thick layers. Starting at the side seam, I'm just going to edge stitch all the way around. Top stitching over the handles might be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you have to lift your foot up a little bit to help it climb up over the thickness of the handles. I'll overlap my stitches half an inch or so, and then shorten, then take a couple short stitches to secure the end. Here's the opening in the lining. Now I'm just going to top stitch it closed. Now tuck the lining into the bag, smooth it down to the corners, and here's the finished bag.